Evan had always been drawn to the darkness, the forgotten corners of the world where the past lingered in silence. His latest obsession, an abandoned asylum deep in the woods, a place shrouded in death and mystery. It had been shut down years ago after a string of unexplained disappearances, and whispers of dark spirits haunting its decaying halls had kept even the bravest away. But to Evan, these were just stories, a challenge waiting to be conquered. "Come on, Mia," Evan urged, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "It'll be an adventure, a once-in-a-lifetime chance to uncover the truth. You'll see, it's just an old building. What's the worst that could happen?" Mia, ever the cautious one, hesitated, but the thought of witnessing something truly terrifying intrigued her. She wasn't one to back down from a challenge, though her stomach twisted with dread. The sun was already setting when they reached the asylum, a hulking silhouette against the darkening sky. As the car rolled to a stop, the wind picked up, and the trees surrounding the asylum whispered with an eerie rustle. Evan jumped out, grabbing his flashlight and camera. "Stay close, Mia. This is going to be insane." But as Mia stepped out of the car, a chill ran down her spine, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. The asylum was still, too still. No sounds of life, no rustling of leaves. It felt like the entire world was holding its breath. "Just stay close," Evan said, oblivious to her growing unease. "I promise you, nothing's going to happen." But Maya couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. The asylum loomed before them like a living nightmare, its crumbling walls covered in black mold. The windows were shattered, the glass scattered across the ground like forgotten memories. The air was thick with dust, and a foul, musty smell seemed to seep from the very stones of the building. Ivan marched ahead, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, while Mia trailed behind, her heart racing. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the emptiness, amplifying the unsettling silence that surrounded them. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the old building sent a jolt of fear through Mia's chest. "What's that?" Maya asked, pointing toward the faded photographs scattered across the walls. Black and white images of patients who once walked the halls, some with hollow eyes, others with twisted, vacant expressions. Ivan shrugged, uninterested. Probably just the old staff records. No big deal. But Maya couldn't shake the feeling that the eyes of the photographs were following her. The temperature seemed to drop with each step, and soon she could see her breath misting in front of her. It was like stepping into a time capsule, but the atmosphere was far from welcoming. It felt wrong, unnatural. As they ventured deeper into the asylum, strange sounds began to whisper through the air. Soft, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to come from all directions. Mia's unease grew stronger. She kept turning her head, half expecting to see someone, or something, lurking in the shadows. But whenever she looked, the halls were empty. Evan, ever the skeptic, dismissed her growing fears. "It's just the wind, Mia. It's an old building. You're letting your imagination run wild." But Maya couldn't ignore the sensation that something was watching them. It was as if the very walls of the asylum were alive, waiting for them to make a mistake. By the time night had fully fallen, the asylum felt like a prison. Every step they took seemed to lead them deeper into its heart, further from the exit, further from safety. Then they reached the room Ivan had been searching for, the infamous Patient Zero room. Old medical records littered the floor, yellowed with age, and scribbled notes detailed horrific experiments. Stories of patients being subjected to unspeakable treatments, their minds shattered by cruel hands. "This is it," Ivan whispered, excitement tinging his voice. "The truth about what really happened here." But as Mia glanced around, her eyes landed on a faded photograph on the wall, one that sent a cold shiver down her spine. It was a picture of a patient, someone she was sure she'd seen before, but the face seemed to blur the more she looked at it. And that's when she heard it, soft, distant whispers. She turned to Ivan, but his back was to her, his face lit by the glow of his flashlight, lost in his discovery. Mia's heart began to race. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the old building. She could hear it, voices, calling for help. Her breath caught in her throat. Suddenly, the air in the room grew heavier, colder. The whispers turned into frantic, pleading cries. Mia's heart pounded in her chest. "Ivan," she whispered, her voice shaking. "We need to leave. Now." But Ivan didn't hear her. He was too absorbed in the medical records, muttering to himself. The room seemed to warp around them. The walls seemed to move closer, the air thick with dread. And then a cold hand brushed Mia's shoulder. The scream echoed through the asylum, but when she spun around, no one was there. The building groaned beneath them as if it was alive, reacting to their presence. Panic surged through Mia. "Ivan," she shouted, but there was no response. She turned to find him, but he was already heading down the hall toward the basement, the darkest part of the asylum, where the worst rumors were born. Mia's instincts screamed at her to turn back, but she followed him, reluctantly, a pulse hammering in her ears. Down they went, each step heavier than the last, until they reached the basement door. Ivan pushed it open with a creak, revealing an almost suffocating darkness. Inside, it felt as though the very air was alive, pressing in on them, stifling them. As they ventured deeper, they realized they weren't alone. The temperature plummeted. The floorboards creaked under invisible feet. It wasn't just the ghosts of the asylum's past. Someone was watching them. Without warning, the door slammed shut behind them. Mia's scream was swallowed by the darkness. The asylum seemed to shift, warping, twisting around them, as though it was alive, feeding off their fear. The whispers turned into agonizing screams. "Get out!" Mia cried, her voice raw with terror. But no matter how fast they ran, the asylum stretched on, its layout never changing, doors leading them in endless circles. They came face to face with a shadow, a figure tall and distorted. Its face was a hollow mask of darkness, but its eyes glowed with a sickly yellow light. Ivan lunged forward, but the figure dissipated into the air, leaving only the chilling echo of its presence. Panicked, they finally stumbled upon a door that opened to the outside. They ran as fast as they could, not daring to look back. But when they reached the car, they turned, expecting to see the asylum behind them. It was gone. The trees, the forest, the darkness, they were all there. But the asylum had vanished, leaving nothing but the haunting memories of the night they'd survived. Mia's breath trembled as she looked at Ivan. "We're never coming back here. Never." Ivan couldn't answer. He was too lost in his thoughts, too haunted by the memories of what they had seen and felt. That night, as they drove away, he felt a cold chill in the back of his mind. Something wasn't right. The asylum was gone, but the spirits, they hadn't left, and Ivan had begun to dream of it. It was calling him back. Lena and Marco had dedicated their lives to uncovering the mysteries of the ancient world, but nothing had prepared them for the legend of El Yunque. Hidden deep within the lush rainforest of Puerto Rico, the lost city had been shrouded in mystery for centuries. The locals spoke of it in hushed whispers, calling it a cursed place. They warned that the city had vanished overnight after a catastrophic event, and the survivors had fled, leaving behind warnings. Anyone who dared venture near the ruins would never leave. Lena, a driven archaeologist, dismissed the tales as superstition. To her, the legend was an irresistible challenge, one that could change the course of history. Marco, her fellow researcher, was more cautious. He had heard the same stories, but his curiosity matched Lena's, even if a seed of doubt lingered in the back of his mind. "We're going to make history," Lena said, packing her bag with excitement. Imagine what we'll find in there. I just hope we make it out, Marco muttered under his breath, but Lena didn't hear him. They had no idea what they were walking into. The dense rainforest of El Yonk beckoned them, thick with mystery and danger. The city was waiting, but so were the spirits of the forgotten past. As they ventured deeper into the rainforest, the oppressive humidity weighed down on them. Towering trees, their roots tangled and thick, created a canopy that filtered out most of the sunlight, casting long, eerie shadows over the ground. The air felt alive, heavy with the presence of something ancient, something watching. The locals had told them of a strange, invisible barrier surrounding the city. Once you enter, you can never leave, they said, their voices barely above a whisper. But Lena, always the skeptic, rolled her eyes. Old myths. Nothing more. Marco wasn't so sure. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As they walked through the jungle, the landscape seemed to shift. Strange symbols were carved into trees, stones, and even the very earth beneath their feet. Symbols that seemed too deliberate, too intentional to be natural. The signs of an ancient civilization, Lena said, brushing off his concerns. We're getting closer. But the jumble was unnervingly silent, devoid of the usual sounds of wildlife. No birds, no insects, no rustling in the underbrush. The absence of sound pressed down on them like a weight. At night, the whispers began. The wind howled through the trees, but there was something unsettling in the sound. Something wasn't quite right. It's just the wind, Lena insisted, trying to sound confident as she set up camp. But Marco wasn't convinced. The deeper they went, the more the jumble seemed to fight them, shifting paths and twisting the landscape. Every step they took led them further into the heart of the forgotten city. Shattered statues, overgrown pathways, and the remnants of ancient buildings began to appear. But every time they thought they were close, the path disappeared, only to reappear in another direction, as though the jumble itself was playing tricks on them. By the time they reached the heart of the jungle, the air had grown thick, the humidity stifling. Marco's nerves were shot, his mind plagued by whispers and shadowy figures in the corners of his vision. He looked to Lena for reassurance, but even she seemed shaken now. Her equipment was malfunctioning, her maps unreadable, as if the city itself was interfering with their presence. The whispers grew louder, and the air around them seemed to freeze, a cold that pierced through their clothes. They found a clearing, and in the center lay the remnants of the lost city. The ruins were majestic, but something was terribly wrong. The air felt charged, oppressive, and as they stepped into the clearing, an eerie fog rolled in, wrapping around them like a living thing. "Do you hear that?" Marco asked, his voice trembling. "Footsteps behind us." Lena spun around, but there was no one there. The jumble was silent once more, but now the fog thickened, blotting out the trees and the path they had come from. They were trapped. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. Figures began to emerge from the mist, shadowy, translucent forms, dressed in ancient garb. Their eyes were hollow, their faces filled with sorrow. They were the spirits of the lost city, and they were watching them. One of the figures, a woman, raised a hand and pointed toward the ruins. Lena's heart skipped a beat as the realization hit her. The curse of El Yonk wasn't death. It was eternal torment. Anyone who found the city became part of it, trapped in the ruins for eternity. The whispers escalated into frantic cries. "You shouldn't have come." Marco's voice cracked, but it was already too late. In a panic, Lena and Marco turned and ran, but the jumble had shifted again. The paths they thought they knew were gone, replaced by thick fog and more twisting paths. No matter which way they ran, they ended up back at the ruins, the spirits growing more aggressive. Marco screamed, but the mist swallowed him whole, his voice fading into the distance. Lena's heart raced as she turned, searching for him, but he was gone. Desperate, she stumbled backward, realizing the jungle had no intention of letting her go. The spirits were closing in, their hollow eyes fixed on her. One by one, they reached for her, pulling her toward the mist. Lena fell to her knees in surrender, her mind unraveling. She understood now. The city had claimed them both. They were not explorers. They were the latest victims, trapped in the endless fog of El Yunque. As she faded into the mist, the whispers of the lost city were all that remained. There was no escape. Kara, a renowned paranormal investigator, arrived in a small, remote mountain village nestled deep within the woods, drawn by the chilling legend of the Black Lake. The locals, wary and superstitious, avoided the lake at all costs. It was said that after a series of tragic drownings, the water became cursed. Some even claimed the spirits of the drowned haunted the lake, dragging anyone foolish enough to approach into its cold, deadly depths. Kara, with her usual skepticism, scoffed at the idea of ghostly hauntings. To her, the curse seemed like just another tall tale. Armed with her equipment and a sense of determination, she was ready to uncover the truth behind the myth, proving it to be nothing more than a local legend. David, her guide, and the only person in the village willing to take her to the lake, was visibly nervous. He'd grown up hearing stories of the lake's curse and warned her to be cautious. Kara, however, remained dismissive, confident that science could explain whatever strange occurrences she might encounter. As they made their way toward the lake, Kara's excitement grew. She was determined to reveal the truth. But the village was eerily quiet, and the dense forest around them seemed to close in, the air growing colder with each step. There was something unsettling about this place, something she couldn't quite place. When they reached the shore of Black Lake, the atmosphere was heavy. The water, dark as pitch, rippled eerily under the pale moonlight, while a dense mist began to rise, curling toward the trees like creeping fingers. Kara set up her equipment, intent on capturing any anomalies that might occur. But David was quieter than ever, his eyes scanning the lake as if waiting for something to emerge. Kara noticed a strange chill in the air, more than what the night should bring. It's just the altitude, she reassured herself, shaking off her unease. David, however, couldn't hide his discomfort. "People here don't come near the lake anymore," he said softly. "They say the drowned never left." Kara smirked, setting her camera to record. "Ghosts aren't real, David. This is just nature doing its thing." But David wasn't convinced. He started telling Kara the story of the drowning victims, how they had been part of a ritual long forgotten. Locals believed they were sacrificed to an ancient god, appeasing it with blood to keep the village safe. But the ritual went wrong. The spirits of the drowned had never found peace, and now they lingered by the lake, restless and angry. That night, as Kara lay in her tent, the wind picked up. She thought she heard whispers carried on the breeze, soft, unintelligible voices that seemed to come from the direction of the lake. Her mind dismissed them as the wind, but deep down, she felt the weight of something watching her. When she stepped outside to check on David, he was staring at the lake, his expression tense. "We should leave," he urged, his voice barely a whisper. "I've lived here all my life. I know what happens when you stay too long." But Kara, driven by her thirst for the truth, refused. "I'll just take a few more readings, David. I need proof." The next night, everything changed. Kara was woken by loud splashes from the lake, sending her heart into her throat. She scrambled out of her tent and looked toward the water, but the mist had thickened, obscuring her view. Suddenly, a cold hand gripped her ankle, pulling her toward the water. She screamed in shock and horror, trying to pull away, but the grip was too strong, like ice sinking into her skin. "David," Kara yelled, panic rising in her chest. "Help me." David rushed to her side, but before he could reach her, a grotesque figure emerged from the water. It was covered in algae, its flesh decayed and hanging from its bones like rotting rags. The creature was ancient, its hollow eyes fixed on Kara with a malevolent hunger. David lunged forward, grabbing Kara's arm, pulling her back from the water's edge just in time. The figure let out a low gurgling sound, but before Kara could scream, it vanished beneath the surface with an unsettling silence. The ripples from its disappearance lingered in the water, as if it had never been there at all. Kara stumbled back, breathless. What was that? What the hell was that, David? David's face had drained of color. The spirits, he whispered, his voice shaking. They've never left. They never will. The ground beneath them suddenly shook, and the water began to churn violently. Kara turned toward the lake again, her heart hammering in her chest. Shadows rose from the depths, figures materializing from the swirling mist. Twisted faces, gaunt and hollow-eyed, stared back at her, their mouths open in silent screams. The drowned had returned, their spirits forever trapped in the lake, seeking revenge for their untimely deaths. Kara's heart raced as she backed away, but the spirits followed, their hands reaching out, their ghastly fingers grazing her skin like icy tendrils. David, we have to get out of here, Kara screamed, but the air was thick with the presence of the spirits, and every step felt like wading through tar. David, now trembling, was just as desperate. I told you, the curse never lets anyone leave. No one survives it. As the spirits pulled them closer, Kara felt herself slipping. Panic overtook her. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening. The spirits' voices, full of sorrow and rage, merged into one overwhelming chorus of despair. With all her strength, Kara pulled away from the grasping hands, pushing herself to her feet. We have to try, she cried, grabbing David's arm. The spirit's hands dug into her flesh, but she fought through the pain, pulling David with her. The mist thickened, clouding their path. Every direction seemed the same: more trees, more water, more darkness. The spirits' wails echoed around them, the air growing heavier with each step. Kara's heart raced, but she refused to give in. The lake's curse was not going to claim her. David stumbled, nearly falling to the ground, but Kara steadied him. She could feel the pull of the lake, the weight of the curse trying to drag them back into the depths. With a final burst of energy, Kara managed to push forward, and the mist began to clear. The spirits' screams grew fainter, and the grip of the curse loosened. They stumbled out of the fog, back into the safety of the village. As they collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath, Kara turned to David. What the hell was that? David didn't answer. He just stared at the water in the distance, his face pale, his eyes filled with fear. It's not over, he whispered. The curse follows you. It never stops. Kara shook her head. She tried to tell herself it was all in their minds, but deep down she knew better. She had seen the spirits with her own eyes. She had felt their cold touch. The Black Lake's curse had taken root in her, and it would never let her go. The villagers spoke no more of the lake, but Kara knew the truth. Even as she returned to her normal life, she heard the whispers, felt the chill in the air. The Black Lake had claimed her, and there was no escaping its grasp.